Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning and welcome everyone. Our first business this morning is the submission of the Timaru District Council. That's an important submission and important business for us. Who will be speaking first for the Timaru District Council? Good morning. Will you come forward and be seated in the front row? Now we have from the Timaru District Council an original submission, a further submission, evidence statement of Ashley Harper, evidence statement of Kylie Galbraith, and a supplementary evidence statement of Kylie Galbraith. Is there anything that I've missed out, or is that the complete list?
That is the complete list.
Well, we're very grateful to you for all of those contributions, and we have read them all, so you don't need to read them to us. But we're here to give you the opportunity to speak to them, and also for us to ask some questions of you. So, Mr. Harper, would you speak first?
Yes, I will. Thank you. So, good morning, Commissioners, and it gives the Timaru District Council great pleasure to be able to be present this morning and to make a submission and answer your questions. I have with me Kylie Galbraith, as you have mentioned, also Judy Blakemore and Grant Hall, and they're senior technical staff of the Timaru District Council, and they will be available to answer questions of a technical nature that you may have.
So it's Judy Blakemore, and who was the other one?
Grant Hall.
Could you spell his surname? I'm not hearing it.
Sorry, H-A-L-L.
Thank you. Sorry about that, but I wasn't hearing it quite clearly.
Okay, and just by word of note, Judy Blakemore will appear before you this afternoon.
Yes.
So in my evidence in chief, there's just 2 or 3 items we would wish to highlight. At paragraph 10, I talk about water supplies from outside the district and to parts of other districts. That is in particular relating to the Downlands water supply, which we manage, and it has consumers in the Mackenzie and the Waimate districts. And the Timaru urban water supply the trunk pipeline travels through the Mackenzie and Waimate districts and does serve some consumers in those districts as well. At paragraph 16, there's a significant number of details there to describe the scope and scale of the infrastructure service provision that the Timaru District Council provides in respect of water, sewer, stormwater and roading.
Yes.
The major item of most significant amongst all those that we have raised is the adaptive flow regime for the Opuha River. And Mrs. Blakemore will talk about that in detail this afternoon, but we do really want to emphasise that the adaptive flow regime that is currently in place through OFRAG works exceedingly well for the community and all its aspects, from consumers of urban schemes to irrigators to the environment, and the great working relationship that the OFRAG committee under the chair of Judy Blakemore has its work and its success over the last 20 years effectively is very commendable, and we just want you to be aware that there is a lot of community support for the way that that group have carried out their work. So I'll then hand to Kylie Galbraith, who will talk about her planning submission, and she is a specialist consultant, and we really value what she's done for us.
Yes, well, of course. Thank you, Mr. Harper. We'll have some questions for you in a few minutes, but we'll now hear what Ms. Galbraith has to has to stay speaking to the evidence and supplementary evidence that we already have in writing. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I won't go through in detail of my evidence, but you've already read it, but I will highlight some very key parts of it. There is a couple of minor parts that, just to bring to your attention, is the values and sites of significant Ngā Tahu, and also the reference to how Opuha Water Limited water take holders are referred to. They're more just a consistency of how people are being referred to, or to make sure stuff is referred to consistently throughout the, throughout the whole plan change. So for the values and sites of significance, there was an omission from Rule 14.5.34, which I believe was maybe an oversight. It's been updated throughout the rest of the plan change, but not in that rule, so we would seek for that to be occurring. Regarding the flow-sensitive catchments, we have a wee bit of concern about the provisions that have been sought to be added back into the plan change. They were originally proposed to be deleted, and putting those back into the plan change is now provided for some controlled activities that only have an administrative aspect that is a matter of consideration. So we've got a wee bit of concern about that's not actually providing for a proper assessment of new activities going into flow sensitive catchments, and we suggest that those additional rules being proposed to be put in are deleted, and the other ones are amended to incorporate those in. Regarding critical habitats of threatened indigenous freshwater species, now there's a few policies that this relate to, and the main crux of this is that we want to ensure that the policies in the plan change enable consideration of activities instead of having a blanket of void in the plan. So this is quite critical when you're dealing with lifeline utilities. We do not know where they need to go at this point in time as things develop, but there is in some cases that an assessment could be done on a proposal, and it may be appropriate for an activity to be remedied or mitigated, and in some cases offsetting might be possible as well. But the way that the plan change is currently written is actually avoiding all that consideration to be undertaken to see if it is appropriate for a proposal to be undertaken within those areas. So that relates to a few critical rules in the plan change, which I've highlighted in my evidence in that. And it also follows on as well to it follows on to the small-scale diversions of water bodies. So this is another one that the tweaks to the provisions are about putting in minimal instead of minimised. That is actually having quite a lot of impact, and that will actually mean that the District Council will need to get a consent for very minor activities that could have been managed appropriately through permitted activities statuses. So that's just something we want to highlight to you as well. The levels plain high nitrogen concentration area. So this is an area that's been proposed to be put into the plan change. Council is supportive of that, but we are actually quite concerned around levels that have been shown in the Pleasant Point and the Seadown drinking water sites, and they've had raised levels, and we're seeking an expansion of that area to try and provide further protection for those drinking water sites, and that is outlined in the evidence as well. Regarding the Lake Opuha, we've got a concern around a part of provision that is in the plan change that is saying that the flow is to be maintained by ensuring that the level of the lake does not fall below RL 370, and so that is for regarding augmentation. So there's concerns around that when you take into account evaporation and seepage and that that the lake could actually fall and maybe totally empty in some circumstances. So we've got concerns around their wording and would seek for that to be changed to enable that does not occur. And lastly, the fish passage at Paeroa Dam. We're wanting that to be amended. So this is to be consistent with the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management 2020 as well, and that is to be protecting the native species that are actually present above the dam. And so we're quite concerned about the current wording of that rule that says that all fish passage is to be provided for, and that will impact on that native fishery that is present above the dam. So we're seeking for changing in that as well. And that's the main key parts of the submissions that we have raised.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's not so much a summary, but a drawing our attention again to the main points, and we're grateful to you for that. When we come to ask you some questions, which we will do, would you mind being a little bit more deliberate in the answer? In other words, speak a little bit more slowly, because the communication system is not quite perfect, and we want to hear every word. Now, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions for Mr. Harper or for Ms. Galbraith?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, good morning. And Mr. Harper, at your paragraph 22 and Ms. Galbraith at your paras 57 and 64, you don't need to turn to it. You address the issue of the high nitrogen concentration area for level plains, and you seek that it be expanded. And Ms. Galbraith, in your appendix 1, you provide a map showing the source protection areas for the groundwater bores, shown in, I'm a little bit colourblind, but it looks purple to me. You don't actually indicate where you think the new boundary for the high nitrogen concentration area should be, and you didn't indicate that in the original submission either. Mm-hmm. Have you prepared such a map?
No, we haven't. We have had discussions around that, and that is we're open to leave it, you know, a bit more open to the council to consider how far to expand that boundary, but we definitely wanted it to be incorporating those drinking water sites.
Have you liaised or consulted at all with the potentially affected landowners who might be drawn into an expanded high nitrogen concentration area boundary?
Can I just divert and ask if... No, not specifically on this matter, okay. No.
All right. Well, just to the 42A team, in your reply report, can you just come back to this matter, particularly the detail in Ms. Galbraith's paras 57 to 64? And I think you have already considered this in your initial advice to us, but in light of the evidence, can you just make sure you touch on it in reply? Thank you. Now, Mr. Harper, just one more question for you. At your paragraph 30, you, at the bottom of page 8, you talk about the unmodified flow in relation to tables 14U and Y. Just remind me, the unmodified flow, is that calculated by Environment Canterbury, is it?
Yes.
And where is that available? Is it available on their webpage, and how does that work?
Yes, it is. I would defer to my colleague Judy, who is able to answer that more carefully and completely.
It is available on the website. It can calculate it from a number of river inflows into the lake and other recorders. I think it is referred to in the adaptive management submission.
Yep. Yes. No, I knew I read about it somewhere. I just wanted to clarify with you how you accessed it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, they're the only two matters I wanted to ask you about. The rest of it was okay from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, do you have any questions you'd like to ask of Mr. Harper or Ms. Galbraith?
Yes, I have three questions for Ms. Galbraith. At your paragraph 21 under values and sites of significance to Ngāi Tahu, does the council have a productive understanding and ongoing relationship with Te Runanga o Arawhenua?
Yes,
I would prefer to answer that, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely productive and ongoing. Council has, by invitation, a seat at the Environmental Services Committee table for a representative from Arawhenua, and we have our Chief Executive and some of his leadership team meet with the Runanga, but also their consulting arm, Aoraki Environmental Consulting Limited, on a monthly basis.
Great, thank you. Assuming the Timaru District Council District Plan contains sites of significance to Ngāi Tahu, are they explicitly stated?
I could probably answer that. The council, Timaru District Council has released a draft version of their second generation district plan for informal public consultation at this point in time, and and what they have proposed in the plan is that they've identified general areas to highlight to people that they should then go and consult with Runanga, and they will then look at to see if there's areas of significance and where they are within the proposal area. They didn't want to actually map and list the areas of significance in the plan, so they've done it in a more general area of identifying areas of importance that need to be looked at and discussed with Runanga.
Okay, thank you. Is the relationship receptive and progressive enough to do a joint submission or a complementary submission, for instance? And I'll get to the point of this in my next question.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So at paragraph 29, in Ms Davidson's evidence on behalf of Ngā Runanga and Tron, and at your paragraph 29, Ms Galbraith, evidence on, you're asking for more stringent rules for forestry plantations and flow-sensitive catchments, the same as what Ngāi Tahu's asking for. They're also seeking more stringent rules for limestone features that contain nationally important rock art. Given that rock art is sensitive to hydrology and hydrological changes and is present in the Timaru district, I wonder why you haven't asked for the same thing for the rock art sites.
So when we've done the assessment against the plan change, we looked at what was proposed in the plan change. The areas that the Runanga is seeking to be included within the plan change is additional matters in some cases, and so we have not gone and looked at what else should be added into the plan change, because there's a process of has to be notified, people will have to be able to consider it and submit in that. So potentially some of what the Runanga is seeking is out of scope of the plan change, for this plan change being considered at this point in time.
You're talking about the Timaru District Council?
Oh no, I'm talking about plan change 7.
Plan change
but
7.
For the Timaru District Council informal draft that is out, the council has worked with the Runanga over those provisions within that draft version at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Just one more. At your paragraph 34, Ms Galbraith, does the LGNZ 2018 comment on the use of biodiversity offsetting where a habitat that is impacted upon or needs to be partly removed due to a community water supply that contains a nationally rare ecosystem?
Okay, so the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management does provide, if I just find my evidence. So it provides an effects management hierarchy that goes through and looking at, when you're looking at a proposal, you look at the adverse effects, you look at seeing whether they could if the effects can't be avoided, can they be minimised? Then it looks at other possibilities such as remedying and mitigating, and then it goes into offsetting and then compensation. So it provides a hierarchy system within the National Policy Statement, which is outlining that there's a consideration process that could be taken against to assessing a proposal. So what I was seeking within the Plan Change 7 provisions is that the consideration process can be enabled to see whether or not a proposal is appropriate to occur within that critical habitat area, instead of it having it blanketly put as an avoid at this point in time, which means that that can't be even considered.
So in your paragraph 33, you talk about the LGNZ
Yes.
report supports
Yes.
the aspect of offsetting.
Yep.
My question to you was, does it comment on biodiversity offsetting where areas contain a nationally rare ecosystem?
It does talk about offsetting as an option. Again, I don't know if it goes to the extent of what you're asking. But it sets out a process of doing consideration to see where you're looking at putting a proposal and is that offsetting valid for the area. So look, you take into account whether or not the area is of significant size to be maintained before you even put the proposal in there, and those sorts of situations. It may be better environmentally to create a new area that's actually going to be maintained and survive instead of this one that's not actually of a viable size in the first place. So it talks about those sorts of aspects for you to consider and work your way through. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ms Galbraith, you were referring to the National Policy Statement
Yes.
in that last answer, and I just want to be sure that I'm following the answer you gave us so well, thank you. You have the National Policy Statement in front of you. I saw that you had it there.
Yes.
Which page were you looking at, please?
I'll pull it out. It's the part that I was looking at is put on page 8 of my supplementary evidence, but I can find it for you in the National Policy Statement itself. So it's on page 22 of the National Policy Statement, and it's the definition effects management hierarchy. But it's also copied into page 8 of my supplementary evidence.
Yes. Paragraph 321, effects management hierarchy. Yes, thank you. That's helpful. Now, earlier in giving us, touching on the main topics, you were referring to a controlled activity, and you gave us your opinion that it would not provide for proper assessment. And I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, just to clarify that. I wasn't quite following which aspect of the plan change you were referring to there. Would you come back to that for me, please?
Yes, certainly. So in the 2 new rules that have been proposed to be added in to the plan change through the Section 42A report, I'm referring to rules 5.189B and 5.10A. And basically what they've done is that they're referring to planting for carbon sink or new plantation forestry within any flow sensitive catchment. And they're both controlled activities, and the controlled activity is limited to the provision of information on the location, density and timing of planting, which is an administrative matter. It's not an environmental assessment. And that's your concern, is that it's not actually considering if there's any actual potential adverse environmental effects of the planting on surface water flows within that catchment, which could then have a flow and effect of water allocation statuses downstream, aspects like that.
Yes, all right, thank you. That's helpful. Now, if I can come back to the important Timaru water network that's discussed in the evidence, I'm not quite clear how that is supposed to fit, and this isn't critical of Timaru District Council at all, but I'm just not clear how it's supposed to fit within the priorities in the new national policy statement. As I understand it, one aspect of the water network is to provide drinking water for people. And that's priority 2 in the hierarchy of priorities, I think. Is that your understanding, Ms. Galbraith?
Excuse me for a minute, I'll just confirm.
Yes. If you look at, is it 1.35b?
Here, yeah. So yes, you are correct. The health needs of people such as drinking water is the second priority underneath the national policy statement.
Yes. And yet the network, as I understand it, is much more comprehensive than that. It also provides water for industrial activities like food processing and so forth, provides water for cleaning and for irrigation of plants. What priority do they come into, would you say?
So regarding the health of people, you've got drinking water. You also will need to have the drinking water expanded to actually types of activities that water is required to maintain people's health, so such as running hospitals and things like that. So it's just not water for drinking. There'd be like cleaning water and stuff like that as well. Aspects regarding industrial businesses in that is going into the third priority, which is underneath the national policy statement, which is the ability of people and communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being now and in the future. So that is to enable the community to continue and grow and develop. There is an aspect around that for the people to maintain their health, they also need to be fed. So there is water required to grow fruit and veggies and stuff like that. So that you can actually link that into the second priority by because it is linked into if you're not fed, you're not maintaining the health of people as well. So it's not exactly clear cut when you look at that wording about where different aspects would fall.
And there is another aspect that's not mentioned at all, and that is the provision of water for firefighting. And that's typically part of an urban water supply, and it's unclear whether that's second or third priority.
Well, thank you both. This is an area where we're only starting to learn how the new national policy statement is going to work. And I was taking the opportunity while you people were before us to get some ideas on how that can fit in, because it isn't entirely clear. Now, we know we're going to hear from Ms. Blakemore later on another submission. Did you indicate that there was something that Ms. Blakemore might be contributing on the Timaru District Council submission, or have we exhausted what you've got to tell us this morning?
You've exhausted what we had to say. I was just making you aware that Ms Blakemore is featuring this afternoon, and any of those adaptive flow regime questions would
Yes,
be best dealt with this afternoon.
we'll ask those questions this afternoon. Well, the Timaru District Council submission is an important one for us, and we're very grateful that you've taken it so seriously and given us such carefully presented evidence statements. And thank you very much for coming in.
We would like to thank the panel and the commissioners for their time and effort and consideration of this matter. It is complex. We understand that, and it is core work for us, and we look forward to your deliberations. Thank you.
Now, I understand that the next submission for us to address this morning is the submission of Opuha Water Limited. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, from Opuha Water, we have the original submission, a further submission, an evidence statement by Ryan O'Sullivan, an evidence statement by Andrew Mockford, an evidence statement and 2 updates, I think, by Dr. Ryder, an evidence statement by Julia Crossman, an evidence statement and an update from Richard Measures, an evidence statement and an update from Kerry Johnson. I can't see her there, but I'm sure she's handy somewhere. And an evidence statement and I think 2 updates from Tim Ensor. And good morning, Ms. Hornsey. I think you have provided us with the legal submissions, and of course we're very grateful for those too.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Now, Ms. Hornsey, how would you like to proceed?
Good morning, Commissioners. With your leave, we have prepared the legal submissions, and I do not propose to read through those, just quickly to identify the 5 issues that we consider remain for the panel's consideration. As the Commissioners will have noted, the Plan Change 7B has been developed over a period of years, and by that I mean that there has been a lot of consultation and working together to reach the position that the draft plan is now in. And from Opuha Water's perspective, the remaining issues that we are seeking relief on listed in paragraph 9 of the legal submissions. We have all of the witnesses here today who are available to answer questions. They have each prepared a very short update or summary of their evidence, and with your leave I would like to introduce the witnesses. To my left is Mr. O'Sullivan, Chairman of the Opuha Water Board of Directors.
Good morning, welcome.
Good morning.
Mr. Mockford is next to him, and then Ms. Crossman. Ms. Johnston, the Commissioners are well acquainted with. Mr. Measures.
Yes.
There.
Yes,
Dr.
good morning.
Ryder, I'm sure the Commissioners are familiar with as well, and
Yes.
Mr. Ensor.
Well, we also know Mr. Ensor from past exercises of this kind as well. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Hornsey, for introducing the whole team, and welcome to you all, and we're very grateful. It's one thing to come here and help us with answers to questions that we're left with, but a lot of very substantial work has been done in the preparation of submissions and the preparation of evidence statements, and we certainly acknowledge that. Now, shall we start with Mr. O'Sullivan? Is that how you'd like to proceed, Ms. Hornsey?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Ryan O'Sullivan, the current Chair of Opuha Water. I've been on the Opuha Water Board for 4 years and have served the last 2 as Chair. Thank you for reading my evidence submitted. The reason I guess I felt obliged to submit to Plan Change 7 was to give you, the Commissioners, an insight as to the challenges and realities of operating or owning and operating a dam, in-stream dam on the Opuha River. It has been exposed by this process, I guess, by myself and fellow board members, that there is some misunderstanding that exists on how, what those challenges and realities are in operating the dam in the community, in certain sectors. So I felt, as I say, obliged to just provide some clarity around some of the challenges we have. Obviously, PC7 will set the framework, replace the WRRP, in which Opuha operates for the next decade at least, and it's therefore hugely critical that we get the process right. So I guess our job, myself plus my colleagues at Opuha, is to get inform you as much as we can about what our challenges are, and so we can ensure continued success in ongoing economic and environmental prosperity in our community. Now, my evidence runs to some 16 pages, but ultimately I make 3 main points, and I just want to touch on them on a verbal basis in my evidence today. But some initial context, to loosely quote Winston Churchill, before we put our heads over the parapet and enter the battle ahead, it sometimes pays to look behind, and I guess when we do that at Opuha, we see 21 years of operation, and we see over that time full connectivity of the Opuha River system in all of those months, and we see delivery of 95% reliable water to our irrigator shareholders. So that's been a fantastic achievement, whether it's by design or by accident. It's been great, and we need to, I guess, have the framework to be able to continue that for the next 20 years and beyond. But what it does speak to is balance. We've managed to find the balance, the sweet spot between water allocation and water abstraction, and that history clearly demonstrates that beyond all reasonable doubt. So now I'll move on to my 3 points. Firstly, adaptive management. On paragraph 34 of my evidence, I've provided a table which shows some quite interesting things, but it shows the inflows of a sample of years, the last 5 seasons, and I guess it exposes one of the challenges we have of providing continuous flow down the river environmental flow and meeting our irrigator shareholder needs. And if you could look at the 14-15 season, the catchment experienced inflows of 94 million cubic metres of water. Now that's around 1.5 lake fills. That's all that came into the catchment over that time. In a normal season, our obligation to minimum flow is 2.7 lake fills, and our shareholders typically use 0.7 of a lake fill for annual irrigation requirements. So to be faced with 1.5 lake fills of water coming in the top doesn't give us a huge amount of optionality to meet all those requirements. What has been central to be able to do that is having a workable and flexible adaptive management regime that can make smart and strategic decisions early on to enable the best outcomes. So I think when we consider continuous water connectivity in the light of some of those numbers, what we've got is obviously working very well, and we need to be very careful about the consequences of changing that to any material degree. To my second point, on page 10 of my evidence, I just devote a little bit of time, I guess, talking about the challenges that Opuha as a board or as a governance entity, has discussed in recent years, and some of the things that are top of mind. Dams, despite appearances, are extremely complex engineering structures, and they require very high levels of oversight, ongoing maintenance, and in some cases capital upgrades. I regret to say, but if the Opuha Dam was a Ford car, it would be more of a Cortina than a Mustang. I guess 20 years ago, building techniques and dam engineering has moved on, and if we were to build a dam today, it would have larger, high capacity spillways. It would be able to discharge more water underneath the structure, and ideally it wouldn't leak quite as much as it does now. But nevertheless, we've got what we've got, and it's our duty, because it is a high potential impact classification dam, 50 metres high, sudden and catastrophic failure would almost definitely result in loss of life. So it puts a huge sort of fiduciary responsibility on us as a board to maintain its safety at all times. Now, this isn't a complaint, but what it means is that the dam is owned by farmer shareholders, and they wouldn't have it any other way. They've worked hard to obtain 100% ownership in the structure. But what it means, if we need to spend $30 million next week or next year or in 5 years' time, we go to our farmer shareholders and ask them for that money. Now, I'm quite happy to do that as a chairman, as a director, when we can show them 95% water reliability. It's feasible. But if we go to them and their water reliability is materially less than that, and they're struggling to make their own businesses work on farm, that's going to be a totally different conversation and a much more difficult conversation. So that's the point I would like to reinforce here. My final point is around tributary irrigators and minimum flows on the tributary systems. So, as I say in my evidence, around 20% of Opuha shareholders by area, some over 3,000 hectares, abstract water from tributary rivers. Now, they have their own set of flow regimes on those rivers, and they were set by a fairly robust process, 20 odd years ago. And what it means is there is a set of potentially dual restrictions for those users. They have their own minimum flow restrictions on the rivers, which vary slightly. Plus, of course, when Opuha is placing its own main stem irrigators on restriction, they often suffer restrictions as well. As we all know, the community sort of expressed a desire to see minimum flows increased on those rivers, and that was going to be difficult because a lot of them were already at fairly marginal levels. But what occurred was the Flow and Allocation Working Party was formed to see whether some common ground could be reached in setting those flows. That was a great process, collaborative process, where all the stakeholders got around the table and come up with a step one flow regime, which you'll be familiar with in the table of in the tables contained in Plan Change 7 draft. wherein lies the problem is the step 2 regime. So what we see here is a risk from Opuha's point of view of shareholders decoupling. What I mean by that is shareholders will look at the value proposition of remaining an Opuha shareholder and compare that to reverting their consent to an unmodified flow regime coupled with some on-farm storage. And I strongly suspect that farmers who are backed into a corner with, say, 70 or 80% water reliability under step 2 will look pretty hard at this. And if it looks viable, we could have up to 20% of our shareholders arrive on our doorstep one day and say, look, it's been great being a shareholder in Opuha, but my contribution is no longer acknowledged. The water I spill down the main stem is not acknowledged under this plan change. Take my shares and please desist on taking water charges from me. And they go away and do their own thing. So that's a 20% loss in shareholding for any business is a material risk, and it's something that we've thought about as a board that is, could create a difficult situation for the ongoing stability of the company. We just need to apply some cost-benefit analysis here, and I think experts that Opuha has employed around economic analysis and ecological analysis show that step 1 there is some gains, step 2 there's some really material economic costs with not a lot of material gain, but I'll let them speak to that. So now I've probably taken up enough of your time. I want to answer any questions you may have, but just a few concluding comments. I guess the overall process has been a little bit of a disappointing one for Opuha. As I mentioned at the start, there is some misunderstanding and misperception out there that Opuha is all about storage and is trying to screw the scrum, but I hope you can see with reading my submission in full that we have a number of obligations and we take them all very seriously in equal measure. So the second point I'd like to conclude on is that there's not a lot of grey hair involved in this process, and what I mean by that is that we're all good at looking back over the last 20 years and saying, well, that could have been done better, or we should change that, or we could do this, but we need to look back further than that, and I think commissioners have been given a copy of the Opuha Dam book, and there's some quite extensive coverage in there, I guess, about how the Opuha River system was in the 80s and 90s, and with our plan change we need to look through a lens of 30 to 40 years instead of just over the last 20 to see where we've come from. Opuha Dam's all South Canterbury's got. We, and I personally, have been involved with trying to obtain sources of alpine water. We're sort of geographically isolated here from much alpine water. The Rangitata water mostly travels north. Water from the east is very difficult to access, cost, cultural considerations and distance. And likewise, Hunter Downs is yet to show any viable signs of life. So we've got what we've got. We need to leverage it as best we can. And final comments, I guess we can look back over 21 years and we haven't got it perfect, and there's little tweaks here and there, but fundamentally we have achieved some great outcomes, and we just need to be careful that we don't throw that out in this new plan change. Thanks for your time.
Well, Mr. O'Sullivan, as chair of the business, it's appropriate that you should be speaking first, and you've done justice to the importance of this business and its assets, and we're very grateful to you for coming and giving us that summary of the important points as they strike you. As you say, you've got what you've got, and we've read the book and read the evidence, and we can see how important it is, and that's why we're giving you the time, and we certainly would like to ask one or two questions as well to be sure that we're fully understanding the important issues that you're raising. And if, as we ask you questions, there's one or two that you'd rather pass on to one or another of your colleagues, or perhaps to legal counsel, you'll feel free to do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Mr O'Sullivan?
Yes, good morning. Just one matter. It's at your para 720, and you touched on it in your verbal summary to us. It's the potential decoupling of the tributary abstractors. And Mr Mockford, you raised the same issue at your para 814, so I don't really mind who answers the question.
Thank you.
But I'd like you to explain to me, if that occurred, if the tributary abstractors decoupled, and Mr O'Sullivan, you say at your para 7020 that our would still have to release the equivalent to maintain the Sale Yard Bridge flows. I don't understand why that would be the case if they're no longer part of the Opuha water scheme. Wouldn't they just be out on their own?
Yeah, but yes, that's correct, although they would still be abstracting water from the system, from one of the tributaries, which contributes to the Sale Yard, collectively contributes to the Sale Yards bridge flow. So the under decoupling, if the Sale Yards bridge flow remained as per Plan Change 7, the dam would still have to release water that was not travelling down the tributaries because of abstraction. Now, okay, some of that abstraction, given 70-80% reliability, would be happening at different times, and with storage there might be some flow harvesting occurring, but I think I've got it right, Andrew, that it doesn't fundamentally change.
Yes, we've assumed that the minimum flows that we're required to meet at Sale Yards Bridge would stay the same. So therefore, with more water coming out of the input to the water balance, we're still having to meet the same outputs without any offsetting revenue as a result of that.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not understanding why you would need to compensate for them if they're no longer part of your shareholding arrangement. Wouldn't there just be separate provisions applying to them? Maybe they have to cut off at a higher flow, or wouldn't there be an independent regime for the non-affiliated abstractors if they've decoupled?
Would you mind if we pass that to the Environmental Manager, Julia?
I can give that a go if you like. So I'm Julia Cross from the Environmental Manager. So if we take the example of the Tianawai, it's approximately 250 litres a second taken there by AA consent holders, so A block and affiliated. So if they all become AN, there's still 250 litres a second of water being taken. They would certainly turn off at a higher, or they'd still be tied to their tributary minimum flows. Sorry, so there would still be times when they're on or off. But when they are taking, that 250 litres a second is still not travelling down to Sale Yards Bridge, and so we still have to release that 250 litres a second to offset that. We just don't get that they're no longer shareholders. So the only way to mitigate against that would be to reduce our minimum flow requirement at Sale Yards Bridge by 250 litres a second.
Wouldn't another option be, and Ms Johnson talks about this, about stacking them on top of the affiliated shareholders so that they just simply turn off at a much higher level, and then the affiliated shareholding abstractors, and so they therefore don't have an impact on whether or not the affiliated shareholders are meeting the minimum flow at Sale Yards Bridge.
So are you referring to the tributary minimum flow, or so as an AN they would then be tied to the unmodified flow at State Highway 1? If they go from an AA to an AN, they still have the tributary minimum flow, and then they have the State Highway 1 minimum flow, unmodified minimum flow. I would probably have to refer to Kiri as to whether there's a way around that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for your answers. I'm still not clear in my mind why you would need to compensate for them if they're no longer part of your operation.
Because they're essentially still abstracting water from the system above Sale Yards Bridge. Therefore, that water is not flowing down to that site.
Yeah. But that's only an issue if the minimum flow is breached, isn't it? And couldn't you prevent that from occurring by having them cut off at a higher level?
Yeah, there may be something around that, but it's at what, because they're not tied, they won't be tied to Sale Yards Bridge anymore. They're essentially decoupled, which means that they won't have a minimum flow on Sale Yards Bridge. They'll have it at State Highway 1.
Yep. All right, well, it's quite a complicated.
Sorry, I haven't been able to provide more clarity.
I'm very happy for you to maybe flesh that out in writing and provide something later so that I can step my way through it. But it was the only question for you, Mr. O'Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Solomon, do you have any question of Mr O'Sullivan?
Yes, just one. You
Thank you.
mentioned cultural considerations in your verbal summary this morning, and at your paragraph 8.4, you talk about regretting not having a closer relationship with the local rūnanga, but not from a lack of genuine attempts to engage. When did you start trying to engage with the rūnanga?
Unfortunately, I can only speak for the past 4 years during my direct involvement with Opuha, but my observations are that there was a lot of close engagement when Opuha Dam was being first investigated, and particularly in the concluding stages by the late Sir Peter Elworthy, and there was a my understanding was there was a strong relationship with the rūnanga at that point. I guess in this the interim period between then and 4 years ago, as I say, I can't really comment. But there is, I guess, churn of people in both organisations where relationships are formed and then they're lost as people move on and move through. I guess I got an insight recently. We visited the marae at Arawhenua maybe 18 months ago. And for me personally, there was a insight into just how busy, particularly the elders are in engaging with all the environmental considerations that are occurring right throughout the region, and they're all trying to hold down full-time jobs as well. So it has been a real time constraint issue, I think, and a churn thing. But look, I guess it would have been great to come to this hearing, for example, and maybe in 10 years' time when there's another plan change, it would be great to come jointly and have a joint submission and have gained agreement on a lot of stuff before now. Look, that's our endeavour in terms of the board and how we hold management to account. Is that relationship is critical, and we continue to foster it as best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I have no more questions, David.
Thank you. Well, Mr O'Sullivan, there was one aspect that you mentioned in your oral summary a few minutes ago, which also took my attention when I was reading your written evidence statement earlier. And you were talking about the balance between irrigation and environmental flow. Do you remember that?
I do, Commissioner.
And I well understand why that was exercising you at the time and would normally have been so. But since that was written, the government has issued a new national policy statement on freshwater management, which seems to be abandoning a balance of that kind and substituting a hierarchy of priorities. Have you had some advice from Ms Hornsey or others, perhaps Mr Renshaw, about those matters? And can we now be thinking in terms of a balance, or do we need to think in terms of the new hierarchy of priorities?
Thank you, Commissioner. Look, I would probably be reluctant to expand on that in any great detail.
That's all right. If you'd like
yeah,
to pass it to Mr Hornsey.
I guess I do have an awareness or knowledge of allocation limits and minimum flow regimes in terms of the old NPS, and
Yes.
by and large, a lot of the tributaries and the main stem, meet those thresholds at And look, it's complicated because there's main stem compensation for tributary users, and there's not direct compensation against that abstraction. And if there's as I mentioned earlier, if there's a few regrets we've got with the Opuha Dam, but one of them was when the dam was first designed, there was supposed to be a series of canals linking the tributaries in the upper reaches, which would provide for the abstraction from those rivers to be directly compensated at the point or above the point of take. That never eventuated due to cost and limitations around scheme area, but it is one of the anomalies of the scheme. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for that. There was another point, not quite related, that again you covered in your very comprehensive evidence statement, and also in your oral address to us this morning. And you were talking about the, and I'm using your words, the ongoing imperative of supply of 95% reliable water to the shareholders. And obviously this is an important issue that's exercising your mind. And my question, just to help me to understand how that works, is this: would the business plans of farms and the business plans of your Opuha Water Limited have contingency provisions for regulatory risks?
I mean, that's an interesting question. One could argue that they probably should have, but I guess as a industry and even as a country, we're moving towards this, different societal standards around environmental considerations, and Timaru OTY, for example, is another one there. Whereas that's never really occurred in the past. I guess it's all irrigation schemes of the past have always been developed and built, and the shareholders or users of the water have always enjoyed continuous supply without a sinking lid, I guess, of water use or volume of abstraction ever being implemented in the past. And so I guess we're complacent to that occurring as an industry now. And the fact that we do have that potentially in front of us is a challenge we've got to meet. But in terms of planning for it or factoring it into business plans or risks around these businesses or farm businesses, it isn't front and centre, no.
I see. Well, Mr. O'Sullivan, your evidence has been clear and interesting and helpful, as befits the chair of the business, and we thank you for it. We're now going to take a morning break for a quarter of an hour, and then we'll come back to the next witness. So take a break for a quarter of an hour.
Thank you.
Well, now, Ms. Hornsey, do we now go to Mr. Mockford's evidence?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Andrew.
Can't hear it.
Are you able to hear me now? Yeah, Judge Shepherd?
Commissioner Shepherd, are your speakers on?
Speakers are on.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me, Commissioner Shepherd?
Certainly, Mr. Mockford, and I'm delighted to hear you. Thank you.
Very good.
Now, we've read your comprehensive evidence statement. Thank you very much. And we would like you to speak to it if you wish. Perhaps just to draw our attention to some important points, that they're all important. But whatever you would like to do to introduce this to us, and then we may have some questions for you too.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Mockford, and I'm the Chief Executive of Opuha Water Limited. I've held this role for 2 years, 10 months. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to briefly speak to the evidence I've submitted as part of the group representing Opuha Water Limited in respect to Plan Change 7. To be honest, this is fairly daunting, as this represents the culmination of 4+ years of significant work and collaboration with our shareholders and the community within which we operate. The gravity of the outcome from these proceedings has the potential to have major negative impact upon our business and our community, which are some very perverse outcomes for a business that has been held up as a success story of how water storage, irrigation, renewable energy can be done by working with and for our local communities. I wish you all the best in your deliberations. I acknowledge that you will have read the evidence supplied, so I will just reinforce some key overarching aspects of that evidence here. Opuha Water Limited is a community-focused cooperative. Whilst it has changed its name and construct over time, the community focus of the business has not wavered since its inception. Opuha Water Limited supports the intent of what PC7 is trying to achieve, but we have serious issues with a number of critical aspects which detract from the central and pivotal role Opuha Water Limited will play in this catchment moving forward. There is significant disappointment around the position reflected from Environment Canterbury in the notified Plan Change 7 and the subsequent Section 42A report. We feel we have battled this entire multi-year process to get Environment Canterbury to actively listen and develop the necessary catchment understanding for what is a very complex system and catchment. For the duration of this process, from the formation of the OTOP zipper development to Plan Change 7 writing, Opuha Water Limited has made every effort to ensure we present and represent a balanced community approach and solutions package for our local catchment. Opuha Water Limited, working to the Opuha River Regional Plan and with OFRAG, has worked well, notwithstanding some minor issues. This only works when Opuha can operate as a whole system. PC7 and the Section 42A as they stand will fracture the balance that presently exists within the Opuha system and create some very real outcomes that benefits nobody. Mr. O'Sullivan has already mentioned and briefly discussed the decoupling. There is a high potential for water inefficiencies, and there is the removal or minimisation of the local community ability to appropriately react to climatic, lake and river conditions. The cumulative nature of these cuts will lead to negative environmental outcomes, which is the exact opposite of what Opuha and its community partners want and have been striving for our catchment. The Opuha Dam, Opuha Water Limited and its predecessor entities have brought significant prosperity, both environmental and social. The burden of operation, maintenance and capital investment sits only with the shareholders of Opuha. Shareholders are presently content with this obligation, but the potential unnecessary erosion of their entitlements resulting from PC7 severely taints this present community focus. There has been no recognition of the significant environmental benefits resultant from the Opuha Dam since its creation. When you read and digest the state of the river, the local environment and the community vibrancy pre the dam, it is plain to see the value that has been added. Our district's current vibrancy and resilience is due in no small part to the availability of environmentally sustainable, reliable water. The system we have currently is not fundamentally broken. Yes, we have areas that need attention and improvement. We have not and will not shy away from these areas that require attention. To do so with decent effect Opuha must be a coherent whole after the PC7 direction is decided upon. The more that Opuha Water Limited and the Opuha catchment system is picked apart, the more the present synergies will be lost, and the resultant discrete parts will lack the effectiveness and efficiency available today. Again, these are perverse outcomes that I believe nobody wants, least of all Opuha Water Limited. We all want a thriving environment, a vibrant community, and a partnership approach to our collective future pathways. Thank you again for your time to present here today. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Well, thank you indeed, Mr. Moffat. Any questions, Commissioner Van Velthuizen?
No, Mr. Mockford, no further questions for you. Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I have several, thank you. Mr. Mockford, I'm a little bit confused and hope you can clarify. A constant theme through various submissions of OWL and Adaptive Management Working Management Group has said the dam was built not only for irrigation purposes but also for environmental benefit. In fact, your evidence at 3.1 says that environmental flows were awarded the highest priority. Yet in Mr. Meta's evidence for AMWG at paragraph 4.7 says originally the dam wasn't designed for artificial freshers. My question is, if artificial freshers to clear a periphyton wasn't accounted for when the dam was first designed in the 1990s, what environmental considerations exactly were planned for in the design?
Okay, I believe when the dam was designed, there was probably some aspects that weren't considered, and I guess one of the early ones that was encountered was around oxygen levels within the lake. I believe that was an unintended consequence, or I'm not sure whether it was a lack of thought at that sort of time, and I guess I can't, hindcast to what thinking was going on at that time. But I guess if I use that example of an issue occurred after the dam was put in place, it was raised as an issue, and I believe very promptly a solution was put in place in terms of lake aeration to be able to deal with it. And at the time of the dam going in, I believe there was a pretty a year that was agreed upon when periphyton sort of started to become more of an issue in the catchment, and I believe that was after the dam was put in. And I guess with that thought in mind, the dam wasn't designed to be able to facilitate artificial freshers, and Opuha in the interim has worked very hard with infrastructure to try and be able to facilitate artificial freshers because of their beneficial nature to that braided river.
So therefore, was the only environmental consideration was connectivity?
My understanding that when the dam was put in, there was a minimum flow regime which was initially suggested as the dam would be able to provide 6 cubic metres per second at CLWRP Bridge to provide the connectivity of the river. And I believe working with Fish and Game, that was changed to reflect the natural hydrograph of the river. I believe that was the primary consideration, but I don't have the level of understanding to be able to confidently answer that categorically, sorry.
Not coming from the Opuha area, I'm just trying to gain a bit of background.
Yeah.
And at paragraph 3.2, the third sentence, where was Ngaitahu in this community collaborative initiative?
So the third sentence, so the Opuha Dam was the culmination of a true community collaboration.
And then you list the groups that were involved.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, that's probably an oversight on my part. Because I am aware that
they were involved?
Arawhenua, I believe, was fully involved with Sir Peter Alworthy and the various entities, Opuha Dam Limited, Opuha Dam Partnership, as the dam came to fruition. It's my understanding that they were fully involved with that process.
Okay, and at your paragraph 518, in Mr Ryder's evidence for AMWG, paragraph 4.3 notes the dominance of trout in the Opuha River, and then again in his table 4 on page 15 notes the absence of both species of eels in the Opuha. Is the low presence of eels due to the disconnect between the upper and lower Opuha River because of the dam?
I guess we have a good alva bypass system to allow the juveniles to make their way up, and we've been trying to facilitate with Arawhenua the necessary trap and transfer program to allow the migratory tuna to make their way downstream, but we haven't been able to conclude that to an operable trap and transfer program as yet. That's certainly an aspirational thing that we'd like to get concluded as soon as we can.
I'm talking about the Alva Pass. How successful is it, given the steepness of and 50 metre height that the Alvas have to scale, even though it's well known that eels climb? And do you have any research information that shows the stress levels or lack of an Alva that have to scale those heights?
I probably can't hand on heart point to any scientific research that's been conducted. I can speak anecdotally of fondly looking in the alva bypass every time that we're up there during that season to physically see the alvas in the bypass making their way to the lake. It's fairly common to see them in there, so I guess anecdotally it's a system that is working, but I can't back that up with a scientific research paper. Sorry.
Do you think some research down the track about that might be a good idea?
Absolutely, and I think that forms as part of the trap and transfer program with Arawhenua to have quite a comprehensive understanding of what needs to be there and how it works, and the risks and the pros and the cons for sure.
Thank you, Mr Mockford. That's all the questions from me.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr Mockford, can I ask you to look again at page 37, I think, of your statement, paragraph 8.5. And you're telling us of a concern that elements of the planning framework would preclude future opportunities and alternatives. Have those opportunities and alternatives been defined yet?
No, not defined to any firm sort of stance there. I guess concept or ideas that are being, I guess, kicked around and considered. They wouldn't be in a state that it could be, I guess, shared any wider with confidence, sorry.
So when they have been developed further, would they need to be considered on the legal and environmental conditions that apply then?
I guess the intent of that point was to make sure that the planning framework that was put in was not so prescriptive as not to rule out potential mitigating options of how Opuha could continue to be able to provide its shareholders irrigation water. We're just trying to keep that optionality open and a potential pathway there based on how this plan change decision lands.
So it's just not clear in my mind. Are you asking that all options could be left open? Though at this stage one can't tell what their environmental effects might be, and indeed what the legal context might be in which they'd be considered. rather than putting it the other way around, if at the time you wanted to progress with an option or something of the kind that you thought of, wouldn't you need then to see how it fits within the framework of context that then exists?
I guess our preference is to be able to maintain to the greater extent what we have currently. I guess this paragraph has been placed in here as if the 2030 flows were to be make their way into the plan that is finalised, then potentially we would need to look at infrastructure solutions of how some of this water could be provided so that shareholders' reliability could be made to a point where it is viable for their farming system.
I think we'll probably discuss the 2030 restrictions at some stage in the course of this
Yes.
hearing. And I think I've got an understanding of what it is you're asking for now, that you want everything to be kept open in case you might want to do something further at a future time.
Yes, that's correct.
And given the obvious importance of the dam and its total effect on the environment, it's understandable that you want it as the Chief Executive. Mr. Mockford, thank you very much for coming and giving us your additional statement as you have this morning and for answering our questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Ms. Hornsey, who would you like to
Mr. Crossman is next, sir.
Just a moment, Ms. Crossman. I'm sorry to hold you up, but I just want to bring your
No problem, it's fine.
statement in front of me. Here it is. Now, good morning. Please proceed.
Tēnā koutou Commissioners. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the Environmental Manager at Opuha Water Limited. I have been involved in the Plan Change 7 process since the initial public meetings held by ECAN and the OTOP Zone Committee back in 2016. Given PC7 replaces the Opuha River Regional Plan, under which all Opuha Water's water consents and all affiliated water consents have been granted, we have endeavoured to meaningfully engage with ECAN and the OTOP Zone Committee over the last 4 years with the aim of building their understanding of both the Opuha catchment and the operation of the Opuha scheme. Opuha Water takes its environmental obligations very seriously. When I started with Opuha Water back in 2014, I understand I was the first environmental manager appointed by an irrigation scheme in Canterbury. Every year we undertake extensive monitoring, environmental monitoring, in order to meet our consent requirements. We also invest heavily in further research and studies to better understand the environment within which we operate and our influence on that environment. We have commenced further monitoring to inform our response to PC7 and the response of the working parties Opuha Water has been a member of or supported. This monitoring is unlikely to stop. It will endure long term because it is providing us with the critical information we need in order to manage our activities in the most responsible way. Our environmental stewardship extends to a farm scale through our audited Farm Environment Plan program, which was again one of the first to commence in Canterbury. I have observed a marked difference in terms of our shareholders' engagement in the environmental space and the desire to be operating at, if not beyond, good management practice compared to when I first started at Opuha Water. Our farmers strive for an A audit grade. This is because Opuha Water, as a co-op, has provided its shareholders with the tools and resources they require to understand irrigation management and good management practice and make better choices on farm. Opuha Water can only provide this service due to its scale and the whole system approach it takes to water management. In addition to explaining the current consenting framework that the Opuha Dam, the Opuha scheme and those affiliated to the scheme work within, my evidence has focused on the critical areas of the Plan Change 7 framework that need modification to ensure current scheme arrangements are recognised for and opportunities for scheme infrastructure solutions are not eroded. As currently drafted, PC7 severely limits Opuha Water's ability to adapt and respond to an evolving freshwater framework and climate change challenges. In summary, there are 5 areas that Opuha Water is particularly concerned about and which it seeks changes in relation to. Firstly, Opuha Water are concerned about the proposals to restrict scheme affiliation to shares, which is inconsistent with ECAN's historical consenting approach and will compromise the reliability of a number of current Opuha shareholders and water users. We believe there is also a lack of clarity and consistency regarding the exemption of affiliated permits from the conditions of certain PC7 rules, including with respect to the OTOP Zone Committee's recommendations. The third point, and this might help address your question, Judge Shepherd, to Mr Mockford, we are also concerned about the limitations PC7 places on future opportunities and alternatives for those affiliated to the Opuha scheme, in particular by precluding the transfer of takes from the tributaries to either the main stem or Lake Opuha. This essentially closes the door to any future infrastructure solutions to reducing allocation on the Opuha tributaries, despite there being no basis to the perceived risk of over-allocation of the main stem due to augmentation. Finally, Opuha Water believe that there are significant efficiencies and benefits to be found through the globalisation of consents, of affiliated consents, so long as this can occur within a sub-scheme in addition to a scheme-wide basis as proposed by PC7. However, the limitations on the rate of take that PC7 places on the transfer of permits to a principal water supplier will only act to disincentivise Opuha Water from applying for such a consent. The amendments sought do not allow Opuha Water to game the system, nor do they have negative environmental impacts. Conversely, they are intended to drive further efficiencies across the scheme, while also providing for significant environmental benefits and include additional safeguards not already included in PC7 as notified. I thank you for your time and welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, questions?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Just one question at your para 4.9, and it carries on a similar theme to some of my earlier questions.
Yes.
And at paragraph 4.9, you talk about releasing additional water for the AN, AA and BA permits, and that's a consent requirement. Would that same obligation be the case under PC7?
So that's a consent requirement. It is with the exclusion of the AN. The reason that the AN in there, from my understanding, not having been part of it 20 years ago, was that when the WRRP was sort of first developed, the minimum flow was going to be for everyone at CLWRP Bridge. And then the proposals for the Opuha Dam came through, and so the AN was included at that point so that the Opuha Dam wouldn't erode, I guess, the reliability of those AN users. When the ORP was notified and the details of the dam progressed, the ANs and the BNs were both tied to CLWRP Bridge, so that requirement has never actually been that condition has never actually been enforced.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would just be the AA and the BA. Yeah.
Okay, that's the only matter I wanted to clarify with.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions?
Yes, just one, I think. Sorry, I'll go back up to it. Oh, at your paragraph 3.1, Ms. Crossman,
Yes.
you talk about consultation with Fish and Game
Yes.
on variable minimum flows. Why was Ngaitahu not included?
I'm not able to provide that that answer, I'm afraid. That was when the OP River Regional Plan was being developed. Whether they were or not, I don't fully know. But I know from conversations with Mark Webb from Fish and Game that he was involved in those conversations back then, which is why I reference the Fish and Game. I can't say with any certainty that that Ngāi Tahu or Arawhenua were involved in those discussions.
Thank you. And at your paragraph 7.7, you talk about cultural values training workshop.
Yes.
How far along is that?
We've had an initial discussion with one of the Aotearoa Environmental Consulting cultural advisors and the cultural advisor from Environment Canterbury. A very positive discussion, and so the intent is to run a pilot program just so we can all learn and build as we go. So it's in train. Yeah.
So do you know if the workshop will include Treaty of Waitangi training?
I would hope so. Yes, that would certainly be
For
our
me,
desire.
I think that's where it begins.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
We need to understand where we've been.
Yeah,
Understand
thank
where we
you.
need to go.
Thanks. No more questions from me, David.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to see, Ms. Crossman, how Opuha water has benefited by your having to be on hand over the last 6 years.
Thank you very much.
I do get one or two questions though.
Sure.
Paragraph 3.7. Yeah, this is another question about the future opportunities and alternatives
Mm-hmm.
that Mr. Mockford was helping me with too. Would these be major alterations to the Opuha scheme itself?
They would require significant investment in infrastructure, yes. Not so much the
So
Opuha Dam, but ancillary infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure.
Yes. So would they be likely to involve a plan change as well to the Land and Water Regional Plan?
That's probably out of my area of expertise, I'm afraid.
Oh, is it? All right. Well, somebody else will pick it up, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Yeah.
Mr. Ensor.
Yes.
Maybe Ms. Johnson.
Yes, if I can refer to Mr. Ensor, that would be
That's all
great.
right.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Then 540, there was another question I thought that you might help me with, please.
Yes.
You refer to the community reticulated domestic and stock water supply. Does that apply to the whole of the Timaru District Council network?
The network that takes from the OP catchment. So they also have, of course, other takes from other rivers within the OTOP zone and within Timaru District Council.
And do they divide up the network so that supply from some sources is directed to some consumers, some classes of consumer, and others, or do you not know?
extent. I think some of the, for instance, some of the I'm pretty confident that the Opuha water, for example, doesn't go to Geraldine. They have their own supply from closer in that vicinity. Yeah.
But that's still part of the Timaru District Council.
Still part of the
network,
Timaru District Council takes, but not included in this.
Should have asked questions there, wouldn't it, about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. 6.8.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now this is the unshared operational surplus
Mm-hmm.
referring
That's
to
correct.
here.
Yes.
Is this supply of water the subject of a provision in the WRRP or the subject of a provision in the CLWRP, or is it the subject of a consent? What authorises that?
So the 233 is made up of 113 litres a second, and the authorised under the Totra Valley the Totra Valley Irrigation Scheme consent, which Opuha Water holds.
Right.
So previously that water had any surplus or bywash water had been discharged into the Tianawai River, and with the building of Gardener's Pond at the bottom of the Totra Valley Irrigation Scheme, that bywash was able to be captured, pumped under the Tianawai River, and provided to some shareholders on the other side of on the south side of the Tianawai River, as part of that take from the Opuha for the Totra Valley Irrigation Scheme. So there was no increase in the rate of take to provide those water users with water. It was essentially I think I've used the word recycling. And then the 120 litres a second, that is what we've called operational sort of surplus water. So this particular take is just upstream of the Sale Yards Bridge. And so when there is water in the river above the minimum flow requirements at Sale Yards Bridge, with a buffer in there, this consent is able to abstract up to 120 litres a second.
Thank you. $832. So PC7 doesn't provide for abstraction from the lake.
Mm-hmm.
Takes are effectively prohibited by Plan Change 7.
Yes, that's right.
So does the submission, the water submission on PC7, ask for something that would effectively address this point?
Yes, it does, and Ms Johnson will be able to expand on that, but my understanding is it provides for a certain allocation for Lake Opuha, which would provide for that.
Right, well, I'm perfectly happy that if the answer's given by Ms Johnson, that's fine.
Thank you.
Well, Ms Crossman, thank you so much for your thorough evidence and for all the work that you've done with Opuha Water in this regard.
Thank you for the opportunity to proceed today.
Ms Hornsey, who would you like us to hear from next?
Ms Johnston, please.
Ms Johnson, thank you. Good afternoon, Ms Johnson.
Good afternoon. How are you?
We're glad to see you again. We've read your evidence statement. We've also read your update. And did you wish to address us on those before we come to questions?
No, I'm happy just to take questions. I did wonder whether you wanted me to provide any assistance in response to the decoupling question. That was obviously asked of Mr Mockford and Mr O'Sullivan this morning. I'm happy to address that if you'd like, and then just take questions.
Yes, why don't you go to that now? Thank you.
Okay. I think the first sort of point to note is to clarify exactly what we actually mean by decoupling. So in my evidence, I talk about decoupling as being subject to a tributary minimum flow only. So the point of difference being that under the current framework, if you relinquish your shareholding, you obviously default to the corresponding non-affiliated category, which means that you still have an Opuha River minimum flow, but obviously it's different between the affiliated and the non-affiliated shareholders. So when we talk about decoupling in our evidence, they would only be subject to that tributary minimum flow and nothing on the Opuha. And so the reason that decoupling essentially creates an issue for Opuha Water Limited is that there is actually not a direct hydrological relationship between those tributary flows and the Opuha. So there will be times, obviously, when those tributaries are able to be sort of abstracting when the flows in the Opuha are particularly getting low, and Opuha is obviously still required to provide for them because the burden of proof on the sale yards flow and the flows at State Highway 1 fall to Opuha Water and not to those individual tributary shareholders, or tributary takes, sorry, not shareholders. So they are, as a sort of almost an element of precaution, always augmenting for those takes because the onus is on Opuha Water to maintain those flows in the Opuha.
Thank you. And before we come to our questions, can we think of the carryover question from the previous witness? I think you were offering to...
in regards to the Lake Opuha allocation? Yes.
That's it.
It's actually in my FORP evidence that I addressed that, which is obviously the subject of tomorrow morning, but yes,
all right.
yes,
well,
but
leave it till tomorrow morning.
yes,
That's fine.
but it is correct that obviously we have requested that there is a Lake Opuha allocation included within the allocation tables within section 14 of the plan.
We don't need to have it twice. If we're going to have it tomorrow morning, that'll be excellent.
No worries.
Thank you. So, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, questions of Ms Johnson on this topic?
Just in terms of that decoupling issue, and I understand we're going to get a written explanation of that. Can you, in that written explanation, differentiate between tributary takes above Lake Opuha, so in the north and south branches, because the effects of those takes would be on
the lake,
the amount of water in the lake,
correct,
which I see as quite a different issue from a tributary take downstream of the dam where the effect is on the waterway directly.
Correct.
So I'm still not clear in my mind why there's an obligation on Opuha Water to compensate for all of those tributary abstractors.
We can definitely address that in the written summary.
Okay. Now, in terms of your own evidence, I don't have any questions from the evidence in chief because the joint witness statement answered a lot of the queries that I did have upon first reading that evidence. But I do have a couple of matters from your supplementary evidence.
Okay.
And the first one is at your paragraph 2.3.
Yes.
And I notice in response to a question from the commissioners that the joint witness statement for hydrology helpfully prepared a comprehensive table which is listed at paragraph 19 of the JWS setting out all of the allocations on the various water bodies and for the various categories of permits. And I just wonder whether or not it would be a good idea to have that table inserted into Plan Change 7 because it gives a very complete picture of the situation, including community water supply takes.
Yes, it does. The one thing that that table doesn't address is the potential headroom that still exists within the BN allocation block. Yes.
Exactly. So my next
Yep.
question was going to be, should we take the table 14Y BN allocations and merge them in with that table that was at para 19 of the JWS to account for that headroom?
That is certainly one option, and let's just say that that is an issue that we have been perplexed with ourselves in terms of how that headroom is dealt with, but that is certainly one option.
And why I asked that, because the reason for the question from the panel to ask you to fill in that table was that it was quite difficult to get an overall picture of the allocations for all the different water bodies and the degrees of affiliation, and so I thought that table was really helpful. So I take it from your answers, you think it would be a good idea to insert that table into the plan change?
I think that that is certainly an option for clarifying and making it crystal clear to anybody looking exactly what the allocations are. I said on the proviso that the BN headrooms are also catered for somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that could easily be accommodated. So. Okay, that were the only two matters I wanted to ask you about.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I've got several questions about over-allocation just to try and help me understand. Ms Johnson, why was the allocation limit set at the sum of resource consent allocation rather than the needs of the riverine ecosystem?
So are you talking about when the WRRP set the allocation of 5,600 litres per second? Again, that definitely predated my time in this process, but it acknowledged the fact that the river wasn't going to be able to sustain any more abstraction, so it kept it at that limit, and that is the proviso for that number.
So what deems the river to be over-allocated?
At that point in time, again, that is a very interesting question. And one that, again, I wasn't around for to answer that, but obviously I'm assuming here that it was on the basis that the flows that were being seen in the river were obviously, being impacted by the level of abstraction.
And yet, because you weren't there, you're not going to be able to answer my next two questions, so I'll go to the last.
Okay.
Do you think that capping at 5,600 litres a second based on the sum of takes in an already over-allocated river would mean that the over-allocation will continue exponentially?
I think you will also find in our evidence that actually the sum of the existing allocation is actually currently less than the 5,600 litres per second, and that the tables provided and the legal submissions actually do propose to reduce that down to the current level that we're seeing now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. That's all from me.
Right. Thank you, Ms Johnson. We'll no doubt hear from you again
Yes,
shortly.
You'll see me in the morning. Thank you.
Not until then.
Not until the end, no.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you.
So now we have Mr. Measures.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Measures.
Good afternoon.
Do you wish to speak to your statement, or are we going straight to questions?
I think I'm happy to go straight to questions. It's clear that you've all thoroughly read the evidence. which certainly makes our job a lot easier.
Well, it makes our job easier too, because you've written clear statements that we can follow, and that helps us. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, questions of Mr. Measures?
No questions of clarification for Mr. Measures, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
I don't have any either, Chair.
Nor do I. So thank you, Mr. Measures. I say again, we thank you for a clear and interesting statement. Thank you.
In that case, we'll move on to Dr. Ryder.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Ryder. Good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Commissioner and Commissioners. Can I begin? I've got the unenviable task of asking to have 2 paragraphs of my evidence corrected.
We'll bring them up so we can do that.
The first relates to paragraph 713. And
Yes.
it relates to some poor wording on my behalf in the first sentence of that paragraph. And I'd just like to add to it to make its meaning clearer.
Yeah, good idea.
So it starts saying that in the first sentence, over the summer months, comma, and I'd like to add the words under AMWG flows, comma.
Yes.
And the sentence goes on, there are minor gains in invertebrate habitat, and if you can strike out the word under and replace it with the words relative to. And so I'll just read that sentence out, corrected. Over the summer months, under AMW flows, there are minor gains in invertebrate habitat relative to the 2030 Table 14 W flows, comma, and minor losses in habitat for native fish, except torrent fish, juvenile brown trout and juvenile salmon. And then in the last part of that sentence, I have written and an 8% gain in adult brown trout habitat. That should be 18% gain.
18%.
Correct.
Thank you.
And just one other correction, please. Under section 8, which is the focus of this Opuha Waters submission, on Lake Opuha, in the first paragraph, 8.1, at the last part of that paragraph, I have written that under PC7, Lake Opuha is classified as an artificial lakes on river which have a TLI outcome of 3. That should be 4. But that makes no difference to my the conclusions in my evidence.
Thank you for that. Anything further you'd like to say before we come to questions?
Just really that the focus of my Opuha Water Limited part of my brief of evidence on Lake Opuha notes that Table 14B of PC7, which is about lake water quality outcomes, Lake Opuha sails pretty closely to the wind in terms of meeting the outcome for the TLI index of 4.0, which is in Plan Change 7 as advertised. And in my understanding, in some years, it would not quite meet that 4.0 maximum TLI limit. And similarly for the total phosphorus limit in Table 14E for the lake, that would not be achieved in some years. and the total nitrogen concentration target for the lake in Table 14F would also not be achieved in some years. Just finally, I note that in my update of evidence table on the 27th of October, I note that the expert conferencing on ecology and water quality reached agreement on a number of matters relating to Table 14B for lake outcomes. A reasonably important outstanding matter where agreement was not reached was in relation to a concentration limit for dissolved oxygen. While we agreed that the B band for the MPS freshwater management is appropriate for Lake Opuha and should be adopted, we did not agree on what the actual number would be within that band. And I'll just reiterate my opinion is that it should stay as a band, and as long as the parameter sits within the band range, then it is, in my view, meeting the outcome. And that's all I've got to summarise at this stage.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Any questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions, clarification, thank you.
Questions, Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I have several for Mr. Ryder.
Yeah?
At your paragraph 4.7, you talk about key species. What are they?
I think it's generally regarded that key species for this particular system are brown trout, Chinook salmon, longfin eel and shortfin eel. They are certainly ones that, my understanding, are valued by various parts of the community. There are also a range of other native fish species. Particularly, there's some galaxid species, and there's some bully species, and there's torrent fish as well, and lamprey. So there are a range of native fish species. They're all important to some extent. Some of them have threat classifications under the Department of Conservation's classification risk. So arguably some are of more concern in terms of their protection than others. But I guess in a general sense, the key species are the two salmonid species and eel.
And in the same paragraph, do minimum flows have a role to play in causing nuisance algal growth?
Yes, they can. It's my experience, it's more often than not the duration of the minimum flow rather than the flow itself.
Yeah.
And often when that occurs in combination with various climatic conditions. So if you've got a long, hot, dry summer, prolonged low flows, the chances are you're going to get nuisance algal growths occurring.
And just a question, well actually it relates to your paragraph 4.8, but it's a general question. What is the difference between an ecological flow, an environmental flow, in-stream flows and minimum flows? All these terms have been used by various experts in this hearing.
Yes, that's a good point. I think, well, from my way of thinking, there is not a great deal of difference between what an ecological flow and an environmental flow is. It's a flow to protect some sort of particular ecosystem value.
Isn't that what a minimum flow is for, too?
I think in a planning context, and I'm not a planner, defer to Mr. Ensel, but in a planning context, a minimum flow is a flow that is set in a plan, for example, that probably juggles a number of variables that are trying to be managed, ecological as well as community and cultural values, rather than just being set to protect a particular ecosystem value.
And in your update evidence, and I'll just pull that up, at paragraph, hang on, at paragraph 2.1, you talk about B bands, different bands, and I'm not sure if I understand, but if a water quality parameter is at the bottom of a band B and being below band B would trigger an investigation, surely being close to triggering an investigation would be put the ecosystem at risk.
My understanding of the way bands are set, they typically have a set based on a range of, for example, a concentration of a particular contaminant or a water quality parameter. And the band has with it, so it might be, say, 1 milligram per litre down to 0.5 is the band, and say that's band B. And that band B often has a narrative that may describe the typical ecological state that the particular water body would be in if it was within that band range. So that's why I'm of the view that it doesn't really, I don't think it's critical where you set a limit within a band, and I think it's better just to leave it as a band rather than a particular concentration point. But be aware through monitoring where the water quality is trending over time, and if it looks like it's slipping out of that band or about to slip out of that band, then that would be cause for concern and trigger some sort of investigation as to why.
And finally, at your paragraph 3.1 in your updated evidence, would 3.5 cumex minimum flow include variability? Part way down the paragraph.
Yes. Well, if it ever got into the level 2 range, if the flows ever got down that far, then there is obviously, it's in quite a low flow sort of drought type situation, and in which case there probably isn't a lot of flow variability going on, either as a result of the way the dam has been operated and the way water's been abstracted, or through natural climate variation. There's probably been no rainfall to speak of. So you're in an area or in the hydrograph where there is probably very little variation occurring naturally anyway. Having said that, there is always the chance of flows increasing due to rainfall or rain events. And you can see that in the hydrographs in the various parts of this river catchment. So even though a minimum flow might be, such as the level 2 proposal for the AMWG is set all year round at 3.5, that's not to say it would be sitting at 3.5 cumex all year round. Very unlikely.
Thank you. It's been very helpful, Mr. Ryder. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ryder. Again, as always, helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think we can now go to Mr. Ensor. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. Kia ora tātou.
Mr. Ensor, as with the others, we read your initial evidence statement and your 2 updates, one of which is shared with some other submitters, but I don't think that makes any difference. So we don't require you to read those to us. If you want to make an introductory statement, of course, here's the opportunity.
Thank you. I'd just like to draw your attention just to a few of the key points, I think, in terms of my evidence in relation to Opuha Water Limited. The first point is in relation to the definitions of the permit types, and we've heard from others today about the fact that it's key to establishing the relative priority of water and therefore the basis for the flow and allocation regime in the freshwater management unit. And the definitions that are attached to attachment B of my primary evidence recognise that there are several ways in which water is supplied by Opuha Water Limited, and it's not just shareholding, but there are other agreements involved as well. And I think you've recognised that through the questions this morning. This importance of setting that strong basis is highlighted by one particular policy and rule, 14.4.13 and 14.5.12 in particular, which relates to transfers. The provisions as notified don't differentiate between affiliated and non-affiliated water takes, and it requires all takes to surrender water on transfer, whereas given that the Opuha Dam plays a significant role in the augmentation of water into the main stems, plays a significant role, there should really be no need to surrender water on transfer for affiliated permits. So I guess that's a key example of why this differentiation needs to be clear. And I guess the last point is really just in relation to an FMU-wide allocation limit, which has been discussed. I'm supportive of that as it provides greater clarity and flexibility. And this maybe touches a little on some of the questioning earlier about future changes within the scheme area. But it provides the opportunity for abstraction to occur from surface water bodies not currently identified, including Lake Opuha, but also better enables transfers from tributaries to the main stem. So I guess just touching on that question about whether a plan change would be required or otherwise for future changes. Look, I probably can't comment on some of the specific infrastructure requirements and what that might look like, but in terms of building in some flexibility to the regime, this is the sort of thing, I guess, that I would be envisaging, that there's an opportunity for transfer of water within the FMU, where obviously allocation limits are maintained and minimum flows are still being met, but where there's an opportunity to potentially take pressure off some tributaries, for example, and transfer to a main stem. So it's that sort of flexibility that I was envisaging. But really those are the only points that I'd like to raise or highlight in relation to Opuha Water, and yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ensor. Questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yes, I do have a number of questions to you, Mr. Ensor, and if you wish to defer to a technical witness, that's fine by me. So the first one is in your evidence at Chief at para 7.5. And it's just the last part of that paragraph at the top of page 13. And you're talking about transfers. Can you just remind me where that would be? A transfer from where to where?
Sorry, I'll just refamiliarise myself.
Paragraph again, Commissioner.
Paragraph 7.5 of the evidence in chief. And
Yes,
it's the
thank you.
tail end of that paragraph at the top of page 13.
I understand in that context it would be from a tributary to the main stem. So that's in relation to the way I understand Plan Change 7 has differentiated between, has classified the catchment and sub-catchments, with tributaries essentially being sub-catchments.
Okay. next question is at your paragraph 8.9. And again, at the tail end of that paragraph, you talk about an exemption for the AA, BA and Kākahu permits. So I just wanted to clarify that the wording you're addressing there is the change sought to matter of discretion 13 of Rule 14.5.4. Is that the exemption you're referring to?
Correct, yes.
Now, can you just explain again why that exemption is required?
That's in relation to the fact that the water is assured to be supplied by the dam, I understand. So rather than it further contributing to any over-allocation situation, the water is being supplied.
Okay. Paragraph 8.10. The issue of spilling, and it relates to, I think, table 14Y, and the lake level specified in table 14Y is 391.2. Do you or another, what's the level of the spillway? Do you know? Who knows that?
391.2 is the level at which.
So that is the spillway level. Okay. And does the spilling occur only over the spillway, or is there a low flow release valve at the bottom of the dam like you have in some other dams, or does water get released through the power station, or is it only over the spillway in this case?
So the service spillway has its lip at 391.2. We'll be releasing water also via the penstock through the power station, bypass valve. So we have the ability via the penstock to take water from I guess the bottom of the water column. The service spillway is there to release any excess water at that lake level.
Okay, no, that's good, thank you. Mr. Renshaw, back to you. Your paragraph 8.11, don't worry, I don't have a question for every paragraph. So you talk at 8.11 about a new rule. Is that release still sought?
Yes, that's essentially to allow where there's an opportunity where there
Wait a minute, is the relief still sought?
I understand it is.
So whereabouts in the track changes that were attached to the legal submissions does that rule appear?
That may be an omission.
Okay.
If you like, I can check.
Yeah, if you could check. I just couldn't see it there initially, and I think the track changes attached to the legal submissions pretty much mirror the ones attached to your evidence. Okay. So yes, you'll address that. That's good. If there was no new rule as sought, what rule would apply?
As I understand it, there wouldn't be an opportunity to take water at that level. As I understand, I don't think it's covered necessarily. There's a very small window, I suppose, of opportunity to abstract, and as I understand it, the rule doesn't exist to allow that.
So there's no other rule that that application or activity would have to be considered under?
Oh, I think it would just be considered under the current take rule, the
which
augmentation
is rule number.
Oh, sorry.
If you need to if you need to come back later on in writing, that's fine.
Yes, sorry, I think it is 14.4.5, but I'll double check that, sorry.
14.4.
4.5. Oh, sorry, 5.4.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, if you could just check that, that'd
Yep.
be great. I'm now looking at your attachment to your primary evidence. Attachment B.
Yes.
And my first question relates to Rule 14.5.5A, capital A. And just the chapeau of that rule says does not meet condition 1B. Should we read that as meaning meets condition 1A but not 1B?
Correct.
Okay. I've got a question about table 14Y. Why is the Opuha River from the dam down to Raincliffe missing from table 14Y, or am I missing something?
Good question. There may be someone better able to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who can give an answer, that's fine.
Yeah.
Shall we say we're going to take a lunch adjournment soon? You could come back and answer it after lunch. Would that be suitable?
Otherwise, I can answer it now if you'd like. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's even better, Ms Johnson, thank you.
So obviously, table 14Y is the BN allocations, and so that table was obviously primarily designed for the tributary catchments as opposed to the main stem, even though there is a small main stem allocation included in there. And so this is sort of part of that perplexing puzzle that we were talking about before in terms of allowing that BN headroom to be included in the overall FMU allocation. And it had almost been sort of overlooked with about the fact that there were actually other BN allocations that existed throughout the catchment.
Yeah, that doesn't actually answer my question. So should there be a row in table 14Y that addresses the stretch of the river from the dam down to Raincliffe, or is that accommodated in the last row
It's
called
accommodated
Opuha
in the last
Stem?
row, which is the 1700 litre per second allocation limit.
Yep. So it'd be helpful if that that row was perhaps renamed to make that clear.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Good. Now, table 14V. Now, the current regime, as I understand it, has minimum flow levels at Sale Yards Bridge, but also refers to lake levels. So at 375 metres, there's one suite of minimum flows, and then when the lake's between RL 375, or less than 375 but greater than 370, then another regime applies. It seems to me that Opuha Water is advocating that we adopt the Adaptive Management Working Group's full availability regime for minimum flows. It seems to me that's devoid of a reference to lake levels. Is that correct?
The lake levels are built into the adaptive management regime.
So the full availability regime, though, is just a suite of numbers for Sale Yards Bridge. It doesn't refer to lake levels, though, does it? Or does it?
No, the full availability doesn't. The regime itself has the lake levels built into any shift. Yes.
I'm not talking about a shift. I'm just because one option is to deal with the adaptive management approach through a consenting regime that you address in your supplementary evidence. So if we were minded to just insert the Adaptive Management Working Group full availability minimum flow regime for Sale Yards Bridge, am I correct in assuming that we wouldn't need to refer to any lake level parameter?
There isn't currently one
No.
there. And you raise a good point here. What?
Maybe you can
Where
think
does that
about that
get
over
sit?
lunch as well.
Mm.
If we were minded to go down the consenting path for the flexibility, given the disagreement between the witnesses on how that complex regime should be represented in the plan, and you discuss that in your supplementary evidence, the question in my mind remains, what, if anything, do we need to do about lake levels for the full availability AMWG suite of minimum flows? So come back to us on that.
No problem.
And following on from that, if we were to adopt the AMWG full availability suite of minimum flows for Sale Yards Bridge, and to determine that a consenting pathway was the best way to provide for flexibility in terms of the alternative regimes, can you just remind me then, because the tables don't have any kind of restrictions regime applying at full availability, is that because there is no need for one, as the releases from the dam ensure that the effects of the takes are always offset?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Got a couple of questions about table 14U. And this is from my reading of the collective tranche of evidence, not only from yourself, but not only from Opuha Water, but from others. Do the pro rata restrictions commence at a flow of 8,100? Or maybe I'll put the question a different way. Can you maybe again come back after lunch and advise at what flow level do partial restrictions commence, and at what flow level do abstractions cease?
Yes.
And my reading of the evidence, and I stand to be corrected, is that the partial restrictions would commence at 8,100 and abstractions would cease at 2,500, but I could well have that wrong.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yep.
Yep.
Now your supplementary evidence. So first of all, not a question, but at your para 5.3, this is the issue of the alternative approaches, the detail in the plan or the detail through a consent process. So thank you very much for providing wording for us to consider, should we decide that the consent process is more appropriate. So that's been very helpful. And the question I have relates to paragraph 5.10, and it's the issue of should the dam release a flushing flow to deal with accumulated periphyton. It seems to me the intent of Opuha Water would be to recover that volume through a reduced minimum flow. It seems to me that's quite a novel approach, and every other dam consent I've been involved with in New Zealand doesn't take that approach. The minimum flows are seen as a bottom line. They're a limit to preserve a whole lot of important in-stream matters. And the release of the flushing flow is an extra provision required to address the build-up of periphyton. And no other dam consent I've been involved with has then allowed the minimum flows to be reduced to make up for that extra environmental offset or mitigating action. So why should that be the case here?
I think it provides an opportunity for a little more flexibility in the use of the flows. There might be a greater incentive to do them for reasons, that may not be immediately obvious or prescribed, and essentially that would be on the basis that the flow that the river is reduced to, or the augmentation is reduced to the point where there are still it's still a flow that maintains values based on Mr. Webb's evidence. So it's about building in some flexibility and opportunity, I guess.
So taking out that point that the reduced minimum flow would still preserve in-stream values, so what would be the ultimate bottom line that the reduced minimum flow couldn't go below should the flushing flow volume sought to be recouped?
I think 3,500
Okay,
is the number.
okay. That would apply year round, or just would it vary from month to month?
It's year round, I understand.
Yeah. Okay. And that's higher than the flow required for connectivity, I think, from...
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right. No, that's all I had for you, Mr. Rensel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, do you have some questions of Mr. Ensor?
Yes, I just have one. At your paragraph 3.5, Mr. Ensor, you talk about cultural benefits. Do you have any evidence that our proposed amendments to PC7 will significantly benefit cultural values?
I mean, I think probably, you know, speaking on behalf of Artawhenua would be well outside my area of expertise here. All I guess I can say is that I understand that Artawhenua have been involved in the ZIPA process, the zone implementation process, and has feedback into the process to date, and that the alternative management regime or the adaptive management working group regime is not miles apart from the notified plan change. So that's probably as far as I would be willing to take that, really.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Coming to your evidence in chief again, Mr. Ensor, there's a point at paragraph 3.1 I wasn't quite clear about. See the last sentence, amendments are made to these definitions in order to recognise and so on. When you depose amendments are made, what are you testifying to? By whom and in what context are the amendments being made? Now, I'm not meaning that, by that clearly defined question to be critical, because I'm not. I want you to understand.
Yes, I think I understand your question. In reality, I'm suggesting here that amendments are suggested and by myself.
Right.
And yeah, based on the submissions made by Opuha Water in this regard.
So where do we see the suggestions?
Attachment B to my primary evidence.
Thank you. Now, just continuing down the same page, 3.2 B. Existing takes to be replaced on expiry that are otherwise classified as a prohibited activity. If they're classified as a prohibited activity, why would the regional plan provide a consenting pathway for replacement consents?
As I understand it, they've slipped through the cracks of PC7. So they haven't been picked up. The water bodies that they come from haven't been picked up by the provisions of the plan. And so whether there was an intention to prohibit them or not, that's where they've ended up.
next one, just a little bit further down this page. 3.3. Transfer regime to assist in reducing over-allocation. Now, you're giving evidence as a consulting firm, independent of your client, aren't you?
Correct.
So I can ask you, do you have a principled reason for opposing a transfer regime to assist in phasing out over-allocation?
And not a principled reason. I personally find that the tool a little blunt. Sorry, feedback. I'm not sure what I'm doing there. And in this case, it appears particularly blunt because there's not a recognition of the other factors in the catchment, which is the dam and the release of water to augment flows. There are a number of situations that arise where exemptions are required for the method to claw back allocation that way, and so while I haven't given a huge amount of thought to lots of alternatives, I've certainly uncovered a few issues with the tool, but as a principled approach, no.
So, giving evidence as you are as an expert witness, and you're very well qualified for that, what regime would you substitute for more effectively phasing out over allocation?
Well, as I mentioned before, I haven't turned my mind to alternatives in this case. As I understand it, the FMU isn't in an over-allocated state, so it would be addressing a future scenario. And I guess in relation to my evidence here, I've really only turned my mind to the difference in how the tool impacts Opuha water versus others, and the fact that because flows are into the main stem are augmented, that it's a different scenario for poor water and affiliated water abstractors.
So would you say that a regional council is obliged to take opportunities to phase out over allocation when they arise?
Yes, yeah, under the national policy statement for fresh water, I would.
Now, at 7:15, if we could just go on to that. This is where you suggested some wording, and I want to thank you for your constructive approach in doing that. But my question is, was this suggested wording or something to that effect detailed in the original submission?
The issue was raised, and I'd have to double check to see what wording exactly was put forward in the submission. But the issue, I understand, was raised in terms of the specificity around a single permit, which is the issue I'm trying to address there through those suggested changes.
Well, just so that you can have the opportunity to find it in the original submission and bring it to my attention there, it's almost time for lunch. So we'll take the lunch break now, and this is where we'll pick it up after we return. You can complete answering my questions, and then you can come back to the other homework you've been given by my colleagues.
Thanks very much.
So we'll adjourn now until 2 o'clock.